All right. Hey, what's happening, everybody? Robert Phoenix here. Just trying to get the channel up and running so that I can actually see you and interact with you to the best of my ability. Okay, we got 5 people watching. There's Jenny. Hi, Jenny. Nice to see you. What's up, Fup? Fup. Hey, what's going on? It's the J-Man, Justice Moody. Judy, hello, Judy. Good evening. Kate, oh, what's happening? Isla, Tesmerk, Ani, great timing. I felt your vibe. All right, we're good. We're sinking in. Sorry, we're running a little late tonight. We've got a hell of a storm here that's brewing right out there on the horizon. So I had to batten down the hatches and basically take care of business. Let me see what we got here. What time does your show start? About right now. We are under a tornado warning, by the way. I'm just letting you know. So things could get dicey. I could lose power. Things could get very sketchy. Here we go. So just have to, I'm getting some notifications here from some people. So let me take care of this. And so we are on the clock. I saw the severe weather warning about an hour ago, and it got my attention in a big way. It said severe weather warning, and hail and all the stuff that goes along with it. So I had to jump into action here. And I still do the show. That's right. Ani says downpour here too. Hi, Janelle. Nice to see you. Who else do we have? Liz. Hey, Liz, all the way from Brisbane, 10:45 in the a.m. You made it. There's Polly Girl. Hi, Polly. And Shari. Hi, Shari. What's happening? Man, it's going to get wicked out there. Absolutely wicked. So I live in a place where we don't have any cover for the cars. And one of the things that we have to deal with in this part of Texas happens to be hail. So I had to go find my myself a little place to park my truck tonight, a couple blocks away under some sturdy trees. Let's hope they stay sturdy. It's either that or risk having my windshield peppered and cracked. I can hear the thunder now. Well, let's get on with things. How was everybody tonight? Isla says rainy and dreary here. Everyone put protection around Robert and Kitties. Do I have a cellar? No. Hey, Michael, what's going on? Jenny says, oh, wow, we left Texas yesterday for vacation. Virginia now. I wonder if it's storming in my neck of the woods. Yeah. So I'll keep you guys posted. There's Mary. But it was, you know, this is I spent a long time in California. So getting used to Texas weather is something that took some getting used to, because California is usually pretty cut and dry and pretty standard, even though we're no longer living in cut and dried standard sorts of definitions of how things are anymore, weather and otherwise. But Texas brought a whole new level of intensity and complexity to my consciousness when it came to weather, and how quickly things can turn. 2 hours ago it was blue skies and about 95 degrees, and now it's in the 70s, and we're looking at 30-mile-per-hour winds and sideways rain, soon to be hail. Interesting, very interesting experience. So let's go over a few things. So Friday, we had almost a 3-hour show, an epic 3-hour show with Steve and Chris, and we looked at the assassination of Robert Fitzgerald Kennedy, and I got into some of the astroforensics around that event, which I thought were pretty interesting. So I'm going to continue some of that trend tonight, and depending on how all this shakes out with the storm, I have 3 kind of astroforensics charts that we can go over and get into some of that. So what we're doing is we're looking at what happened to a particular person or a particular event, and then we're kind of overlaying the astrology of the moment and seeing what we can derive, if there's any truths or any revelations that arise out of that process. So we'll do some of that tonight. And I just wanted to, I wanted to get into the chart of the moment here. Let's go online. Let me get into some current astro stuff, where we are. Maybe do a couple of interesting charts here. Let's see what we have. Oh, by the way, if you haven't checked out the latest episode that I did with Regina, we're looking at the summer ahead, and we got into some really interesting discussions and conversations. So what is this for? Oh, I have to change this. Hold on one second. Yeah, we got into some really interesting conversations and broached some topics that I thought were kind of edgy, I think, not for Regina, but for Regina's audience at times. And I know that there's a lot of crossover, but, you know, I think that, how do I say this? Well, first of all, I think we're changing. That's number one. And people who have had certain belief systems, say 10 years ago, I think are having different kinds of belief systems now. And if you aren't experiencing that, or at least re-examining your belief systems, if you're static and you're still believing in the same things that you did 10 years ago, unless say you're like really strictly orthodox, here comes the thunder and the lightning. I just saw the first flash. You might even be able to hear it through the mic. Then I think you're missing the boat. You're really missing the boat, because there's so much happening in terms of consciousness right now that every day has the potential to kind of rock your world. And I think Regina's audience is kind of coming along for that ride. And I know that Regina can get out there and she can get pretty close to that third rail, whatever we talk about that third rail to be. Let me get to the chart of the moment. Here comes the thunder and lightning. Okay, hold on now. We're going to go home here. So our discussions seem to get further and further out from the comfort zones that I think perhaps her audience or her viewers have become accustomed to. And I think I think it's really okay. In fact, I think it's essential, because we are not in Kansas anymore. All right, here we go. I'm popping the chart of the moment. Did you guys see that video of that guy who was mowing his lawn in Canada as there was a tornado approaching? Have you seen that picture of that dude? Talk about cool as a cucumber. Wow. All right, let me jump in here and let's take a peep at the chart of the moment, which I have up on the screen. Here we go. There it is right now. 7:51. This is the chart of the moment in Fredericksburg. Right here, part of the hill country. We got Sag on the ascendant, Jupiter and Sag. We got a grand cross. Got a Jupiter-Sun opposition. Maybe I should watch my mouth tonight. Sometimes I get in trouble when I say things. That's okay. It's all right. Not with you guys. You guys are cool. You hear that thunder? You guys have been vetted. We got the moon in Virgo right there. It's conjunct my true node. No, it's not all about me. I'm just making a reference point here. The midheaven is in Virgo, and we've got a classic grand cross with Neptune in Pisces. And oh yeah, fourth house. We're talking deluge right now. This is really appropriate. I mean, this chart of the moment for Fredericksburg is totally spot on, because we've got antediluvian, Noah Heidick conditions out there. It's like 2 by 2, right? This is what's happening. And there's Neptune right on the fourth house cusp. So hopefully we'll be able to weather this grand cross. So the grand cross is a really interesting aspect in astrology. So why don't we talk about the grand cross a little bit, since this is what we're looking at. Grand cross is usually a byproduct of a chart that's called a splash chart, meaning that there are planets in 9 out of the 12 houses, and wouldn't you know it, we've got planets, if you want to throw Chiron in there, in 9 out of the 12 houses. And the moon is within 5 degrees of the midheaven, the 10th house, so it's interesting enough for us to read it. So we could probably put the moon right in there. And if we wanted to make this official, we could put Neptune right in the 4th house. Now we've got our 9 houses easily. At this point, we'd have 10. So with a splash chart, we're looking at planets in at least 9 houses. 10 is not uncommon with the splash chart. And people that have splash charts, more than likely, will have a grand cross because of how the planets are aligned. And because you're just going to get the 90-degree angles and you're going to get the oppositions. And so for an individual with a grand cross, it's a lifetime of testing. I mean, that's just the way it is. And I feel like that grand cross chart people that have grand crosses in their lives, the recipients of the grand cross, are here on kind of a program of mastery, and that they're really using that grand cross to forge strength and overcome obstacles. There's a guy who's been associated with the show for a while. I don't think he shows up in the chat room that much anymore. Eric Roth, who used to be a real avid listener. Eric has one of the most complicated charts I've ever seen. And buried in Eric's chart is a grand cross. And one of the things that always struck me about Eric was how just intelligent he was, and how brilliant. Of course, he was a Virgo, early Virgo, so he had a lot of that kind of really analytical Virgoan intelligence. He had a lot going on. And I also saw Eric, really struggle at times, and watch him overcome his struggles. I don't think he minds me mentioning his name because I've done his chart before a long time ago when we were doing the blog talk stuff. But I would watch him overcome a lot of the challenges and struggles that he would have. And when I was doing a lot of work with Eric, he was in his 30s. And so I would assume by the time Eric hits his, the Saturn opposition at around 44, that he's going to wind up, really ironing out these dynamics of the Grand Cross. And the moral of the story is that I watched him do this. Over time, I would see him, butt up against the challenges of the squares. So that ultimately at some point, those squares are reconciled. And that the individual who has a grand cross who can reconcile those squares is capable of great things and can really experience a high degree of achievement. So if you've got a grand cross in your chart, and if you can wrap your head around this idea that you chose your incarnation, which I believe you do. Now, there are some people who think we get trapped in this sort of downdraft of being recycled souls so we can batteries for this matrix, okay? At the end of the day, I still think we have consent around that. Even if that's true, even if that's the case, we're still giving our consent, all right? So if that's the case and we are giving our consent, we are coming in, I think ultimately, what our goal here is to free us from the cyclotron of reincarnation. And that if we choose to come back, that's on us. That's on our, if we want to be a bodhisattva, that's on us. Or we could go off and, go somewhere else, some other part of the universe. But the chart offers us an opportunity to work through things on a third dimensional level. But there's also and what I think is going to become more important in a lot of ways is that the chart represents our life work in relationship to our spirit, in relationship to our soul, and in relationship to the really long path of eternity that we're all on, okay? So when we look at a chart from that perspective, it begins to take on a much broader and deeper resonance. And one of these nights, what I think, here's what we'll do. Next week, we'll get into the draconic chart. And I think I've done it before, but the draconic chart is really interesting. And next week, we'll get into some draconic chart stuff because the draconic chart is called the chart of the soul. And I've done some really I think, interesting work with people with their natal charts and their draconic charts. And that's something I do with what's called the everything reading, where I put together all these different systems and try to build a comprehensive picture for the individual, not just with Western mundane astrology. But when you get into that draconic chart and you look at that versus the natal chart, I've seen some mind-blowing stuff, really, really mind-blowing. Well, just from the natal perspective alone, though, you know, there's a lot going on. There's a lot that you can take from it, you know, whether or not you're looking for a new job, you're willing to relocate or wanting to relocate, because we're on a continuum here. You know, this is a blink of an eye. And when we leave, you know, we're going places. And what you do here is important. And the chart can actually help you and assist you with that, so you can begin to understand and comprehend and contemplate the eternity of your existence, right? So let's get into this. Let's say this is an individual for a moment, okay? Oh, I'm hearing sirens now. So there's some emergency stuff happening in the neighborhood. Okay, interesting. Well, I'll keep you posted on what's going on with the deluge. So let's say this is an individual's chart. Well, the first thing that they'd have to get through is this Sun-Neptune square. And the squares to Neptune, with maybe the exception of Jupiter, are really, and I've talked about these are life lesson squares. These are life lesson squares. Here's where you get through the diminishing sense of identity and self, right? So if this was somebody's chart and they had the sun in the 7th house, what would be important to them would be relationship. That they would seek to find themselves in the contours of relationship, in that place where, especially with Gemini, they'd have another person to bounce off of and remind them of who they are and do things together. You know, sometimes with Gemini in the 7th house, it could be a bit of a hall of mirrors, but that's what this person would be here to do. With the square to Neptune, there would be subterfuge going on with that. At any number of places along the way. It could be self-subterfuge, it could be subterfuge from another, if it's within relationship. It could be self-sacrifice. Anybody ever get into a relationship where you thought you were really helping somebody, and then really at the end of the day, you realize that all you were doing was just siphoning off your energy? You know, and you were, and at the time, you really thought that you were involved in something powerful and intense, and something that sort of, you know, reeked of salvation, right? That to me would be like a Sun-Neptune square with Sun in the 3rd house. Doesn't matter what the sign is. But in Gemini, it gets very, very tricky, very tricky. So the subterfuge could also come at home. That the attitudes and the beliefs, the lack of boundaries that a person with this chart would experience at home would undermine their ability to be able to have solid relationships. Just on this aspect alone, right? Like, look at this Grand Cross. If this is a chart of somebody born right now, they'd have a hell of a lot to work on, because having Neptune down in the 4th house is a tricky foundation. It's water. Do you build your house on water? No, you build your house on dry land, theoretically, right? So people that have water in the 4th house, whether it's Neptune, Cancer's better, obviously, because that's Cancer's house. Scorpio there can be very intense. Of the 3, Cancer's the best. Scorpio and Pisces on the 4th house cusp can be real tricky because your foundation is watery. And in Neptune with Pisces there, it's about boundaries and things like, you know, alcoholism, or, you know, fluid roles. Who's the parent? Who's the child? Who's the brother? Who's the sister? You know, I mean, it's not easy. And, you know, and I've got Pisces down there in my chart, and I can tell you, you know, I had some boundary issues when I was a kid. I was a latchkey kid, so I could come and go as I please. And that, when you have that kind of an upbringing for a while, it kind of gets into your consciousness, and you can do pretty much anything you want, right? It's like you come home and nobody's there until 6 o'clock at night. I'm just telling you, right? This is, so when we're dealing with the 4th house, it's that fluid kind of environment. So this is not easy. This would not be an easy aspect. to have in this chart. So the individual would have to overcome the lack of roots or the lack of solidity and the actual domestic situation and what they went through with their home life. They'd have to really understand that in order to have a successful relationship. They'd have to really understand that, because they couldn't have one without that. Not with this aspect. It'd be very difficult. And then we have a Sun Moon square here, and that would be, again, super, super challenging, because the individual would not be able to trust their emotions with the Sun Moon square. And the Moon is in Virgo, so it tends to be incredibly critical, right? And in this chart, this would represent the mother at the apex of the chart. So the mother would have a dominant role or dominant effect on the individual in the 9th house. And then the squares coming off that would be very, very conflicting, extremely conflicting. And this would be a mother who might be a working mother who doesn't have a lot of time, right? There could also be at times idolization of the mother and alienation with the mother too, trying to reconcile Neptune and the Moon together. So this is a really interesting chart in a lot of ways. And then we've got the emotional exuberance of Jupiter over here in the 1st house, which says, hey, it's party, right? I mean, Jupiter, Sagittarius in the 1st house, is reminds me of a number of sayings, one of which is by Todd Rundgren, and anything worth doing is worth overdoing, or William Blake, the road to wisdom, the road to excess leads to the palace of wisdom. These are all very Jupiter Sagittarian 1st house kinds of sayings, and clearly this is what this would represent. And there would be, I think, a high degree of or potential for addiction in this chart because of the Jupiter square to Neptune, the Jupiter square to the Moon. It's kind of like, well, I'm not getting anything from the mother here. I'm not getting anything from my home. I'm going to go blam into my 1st house, and I'm just going to let it rip. Let it rip. And maybe I'll bring some people along for the ride. It's a very interesting chart, right? Jupiter, we got Saturn, Pluto in the 2nd house. And this is where I think the chart takes on some very strong resonance, is right here in the 2nd house. Because we've got a Sun with the inconjunct to Saturn, meaning at some point in time, this individual would have to really have a meaningful connection with Saturn. And this could be either the father or some other force that would wind up creating some form of discipline, structure, and order. And this individual would be searching for it. This is almost like the search for the father figure with the broken line, the inconjunct. And if that connection is made, then there's the potential of some very interesting things happening. We can have the solidity of the Moon, and the moon here can become more grounded, more structured. There can be more discernment here. Then we have the sextile going on with Mars and, to a lesser extent, Mercury and passion, and getting into the 8th house and finding that hidden place, searching for mysteries that can empower this person, facing their shadows, facing their fears. Very, very. This is a chart where somebody could go through a lot in their lifetime. And with the sextiles, there's the opportunity for activation. And I think this would be a very creative chart as well, with the Mars trine to Neptune and the Mercury trine to Neptune. It's a wide trine, psychic, creative, and wild, bit wild. Uranus in the 5th house. It wants to play by its own rules. Fascinating chart in a lot of ways. But what's to say about us for the week ahead? So what we're going to look at now is we're going to some of the angles. So what we have here, of course, is that ongoing Saturn sextile to Neptune, which we've been talking about, over the course of the last couple of months on these shows. And that's an opportunity for us to get our spiritual lives right. So if you want to make an adjustment, if you want to get stronger, you want to get clearer, you want to get healthier, you want to deal with distractions, you want to deal with bullshit in your life and get it out of the way, and do so in a way that is affirmative and in a way that is actually how do I say this? Moving more towards this idea of spirit, right? More towards this, this gnosis, right? We talked about logos, or I did last week. This relationship with logos, it's right here. It is right here. This is prime time, baby, and it's going to be happening all the way through up till next year. And I really suggest you guys catch this ride because it's essential for where we are now, because we don't know where things are going to go. Everything, and I'm not trying to sound alarmist. I'm not trying to paint a picture of, well, you better get on your hands and knees and repent or anything like that. But I really do think it's important to get your ducks in a row and to make sure you're living a clean life. And clean, I mean clean by your emotions, clean by your intentions, maybe even your body, if you can swing it. I know some people have some issues with preconditions, whether they're addictions or whether they're dealing with some really heavy, serious physical pain. But this is a time for this to happen. And this sextile right now, and Pluto's along for the ride too. This sextile has a lot of juice, and you can take advantage of it. So just figure out where you want to grow. Limitation right now can be your friend, okay? Because that's what Saturn does. It limits. And as we limit, Pluto transforms, especially in Capricorn. Saturn in Capricorn is about pruning, right? It's pruning. So as we get into this, Pluto will transform you through dealing with your limitations and being conscious around your limitations. And then when you do that, you move into that sextile with Neptune, you realize that there's something deeper going on here. This is a really important aspect. And I think it's a very profound and spiritual one. And I would say, don't lose sight of it. This is don't be afraid. Number one, it's not about fear. And I do think it's about, preparing yourself so that you can move through whatever we're moving through in this life in a way where you're clean, right? You don't have a lot of bullshit, because it's the bullshit that you'll get hung up on. It's the bullshit that will catch you, hooks of fear, right? That's what'll happen. And the more that you can get through that, the easier you'll be able to see what's happening too. Because there's a lot of bullshit happening right now. I was on Facebook earlier tonight, and Masaki Miyagawa sent me this link. And the link was how Snapchat had a filter. Snapchat has these filters. And Snapchat had this filter where it's celebrating Pride Month. And one of the things that it said was it was about this all-inclusivity around love, including age. And people notice this. And it's like, what the hell is going on here? And I was talking about this with Regina, this whole idea of the age gap love thing. And so people jumped on Snapchat, and they actually, I think, removed the filter. They took it down. I don't know if they changed it to reflect the fact that maybe age wasn't the best thing to include in that filter. And you have to ask yourself, are these people naive, or they're just trying to sneak things in? You see, so this is kind of where we're at right now, right? This is part of the waking up process. This is Saturn-Pluto conjunction. And Neptune is a filter. It's a different kind of filter, right? But we're looking at it through more of a position of, how do I say this, strength, or more of a position of, hey, listen, this is not going to work. This is not going to fly. What Snapchat was advocating was pedophilia, so they quickly, changed their filter. So really interesting times around this. And that's why this is moving forward, right? If you're going to get through this time, you're going to have to be clear. That's the bottom line. You're going to have to be clear. And if you don't want to just turn this planet over to basically, the satanic panic party. No, satanic panic's more like Tipper Gore and the Christians. If you don't want to turn this planet over to the inverters, because that's what they're doing, everything's getting inverted, right? Then you got to stay on your toes. And I think we have I think we have a responsibility. That's just me. I think we have a responsibility to hold space for some of the things that we deem to be really sacred and sacrosanct, including our relationships with our children and children in general, right? I think that should be inviolate, should never allow to be defiled, desecrated. So it's pretty intense, and we're kind of on it now. So this is what we're talking about, and there's more. And, you know, it's like, it's going to be challenging because people are like, well, can't I just have fun anymore? Isn't life about fun? No, not life is really not necessarily about fun. Or there's some opportunity this summer with Mars and Leo, where, you know, having some fun and some creativity and being out in nature, that can be cool, right? Because we got to have a little joy, or else, man, this is going to be one dark and grim ride. But on the other hand, you know, we're in it now, and we're in this place where we're watching the culture being modified before our very eyes. And unless you're paying attention, you're gonna just get swept along with the tide, right? That's the Jupiter square to Neptune. That's getting swept along with the tide. And we're trying here with this Jupiter-Neptune square to sort out what's real and what's true and what's valid. And people are they get hung up on shit. They get hung up on shit. And I'll tell you where they get hung up. Is like, let's say, first of all, let's say somebody knows somebody who's gay, friend of the family, right? Good person, yada, 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 no red flags. So it's like, well, you know, that person's okay. And we deal with people individually. And I think that's what everybody deserves that. Everybody deserves the opportunity for us to deal with them on an individual basis, okay? I think that's really important. Because anytime you create a stereotype in some ways, you'll be shown the opposite. You go, oh, geez, I had these thoughts about this person. They're showing me something very, very different, okay? Now, that said, we also have to be fully engaged, conscious, and aware of institutionalized programming, which at times can be very, very different than dealing with somebody on an individual level. So, for instance, somebody will say, well, gee, I don't know, what's so big about homosexuality? What's such a big deal about it? Why can't everybody just love each other? Well, yeah, on some level, right? There is nothing wrong with it, you know, or whatever that thing is, you know, fill in the blank. But then what happens often is that if we allow something based on a given set of permissions, if we allow that to happen, then there's an institutional level that comes in and begins to change it, begins to alter, because on some level it's made sense for us personally, but institutionally, all of a sudden we're dealing with a whole different beast. So this is a really interesting time and a challenging time in that regard, because we're having to go through, like, really trying to figure out and sort out, you know, what's valid, what's real, what's meaningful, and how do we apply to our lives so that we can stay fluid and not get stuck in a position, but at the same time also not be so fluid that anything goes, and we're just, you know, abdicating our moral responsibility along the way. It's a very interesting time, and I think everybody's got to sort through that in their own way, and that's part of the Jupiter square to Neptune. And we have the Jupiter opposition to the Sun. That'll be exact tomorrow. It's going to be an interesting Monday for sure, because this moon is still going to be in Virgo. It's going to be the final degrees of Virgo when you wake up tomorrow and go off for work. So we'll still be in a bit of that Grand Cross energy, like our good friend down in Australia, Liz. It's already the Virgo moon, and she's already woken up on Monday and dealing with the exactitude of the Virgo moon and trying to get things done. But we're going to have this opposition starting tomorrow. And Jupiter-Sun oppositions, obviously, they're interesting to begin with, because on the one hand, you've got Jupiter's like, hey, here's the big picture. Look at the big picture. And then you have the Sun on the other side, and it's like, well, it's just me. What am I supposed to do with all that? What am I supposed to do with that big picture? I'm just a guy, or I'm just a gal. But no, look, there's something going on here. Just come on over here. and see it, you know, and then the sun's like, okay, well, let me see what happens here. That's one version of it. The other version of the sun, Jupiter-Sun opposition is it's a big dream. It's a big idea. It's pie in the sky. So the individual says, hey, look, I've got a great idea. Look at this. I'm going to really go after it. A lot of times when you have people who have Jupiter squares to the sun or oppositions to the sun, they will overshoot their marks. They'll have big ideas, they'll dream big, and sometimes they'll fall big, right? So the challenge with the Jupiter-Sun opposition is to try to kind of understand what you're capable of. And with the sun in Gemini, it's not a bad thing, because the sun in Gemini could look at all the various parts. Say, well, this is what we need here, this is what we need here, this is what we need here, what we need here, put it together and bang through the cannon of that Jupiter in Sagittarius, and, you know, can make it happen. So this is what's happening tomorrow. One of the things that I would say from a work perspective would be make sure that the people that you're working for are not asking more of you than you're capable of. And with the Jupiter-Sun opposition, that could be the case. So you might agree to it and say, yeah, I could do that. Yeah, I could do that. Yeah, I could do that. And in actuality, it could be a little bit more difficult than that. We got a bunch of stuff in Cancer, and that's going to lead us into the eclipse on the 2nd of July. It's going to be a very interesting eclipse. By that time, Mars will be way over here. We'll have Venus, I believe, in Cancer at that time. Mars will be in Leo. I covered a lot of the eclipse energy with Regina. I'll go over more of that as we get closer to the eclipse. I think it's a very important eclipse, because this one and then the lunar eclipse that follows on the 16th are companion eclipses to the big eclipse happening on the 26th of December, just 4 days after the winter solstice and 1 day after, you know, the holiday we celebrate as Christmas, and leading us into the Saturn-Pluto conjunction in January and February of 2020, which is going to be a really big deal. So these eclipses coming up should give us some insight as to what we can expect during that time. So we'll get into more of that as we get closer to the eclipses. But we have Mars getting right up on the true node, and we're about 1 degree off. And that's, you know, that's very interesting, because we're also in this position where we've got Saturn, Mars, and Saturn and Pluto, Mars opposition. Well, I think the energy is going to get intense this week. I think it's going to get intense. I think you're going to see people there's already been some weird stuff happening. And it does have some correlation with what's going on with this Pride Month. So I read a story about these two young women in England who were lovers. And apparently they were out displaying their affection for one another. And they were beaten up. And they were, you know, they have bloody faces. And now I don't know who did it. I don't know who did it. I didn't read any, I just saw the picture, right? And one of the things that London has become is it's become heavily populated by the Muslim population. And I'm not saying that the Muslim population did this. I'm not making, but what we're talking about here is very intense kinds of feelings, and Cancer can be very provincial. There's a provincial energy around Cancer. And I'm not saying that that's bad, but it's provincial, meaning that it can be real slightly closed, right? And even with Jupiter in opposition with the sun, because Jupiter it tends to be religious in Sagittarius and even dogmatic. And so if we have people running off on a Gemini program, you know, exploring same-sex relationships during Pride Month, and you've got judgmental Jupiter over here, and you've got this opposition going on over here, look out. Right? So these girls, they got their asses kicked. And then in DC, I don't know if you saw this or not, but they had this parade. It's kind of funny, actually. They had this parade where somebody heard a gun, but it wasn't really a gun. And everybody went running, right? They went running everywhere. There's your Jupiter-Neptune square. So this big parade caused a huge amount of panic. 8 people actually had to go to the hospital, not because anybody got shot, but because they got hurt in the panic. like Panic at the Disco. So these energies are running really high right now. And this whole month is like Gay Pride Month. I didn't even know this, by the way. I didn't know it, or Pride Month. And so now we're dealing with, not just in this country, but in Europe as well. We're dealing with how people are responding to this kind of, I don't know, unofficial holiday, this celebration, whole month. It's a lot. That's a lot, man. Do we get straight month? Do we get straight Pride Month? I don't think so, do we? So, every month is straight Pride. Well, not really. Because now we have Black History Month. Now we have Gay Pride. That's 2 months. It's 2 months. Anyway. But I think I think the energies are intense. And I think we're going to see more of this. I think we're going to see some more stuff going on. And I think it's going to get kind of heated. I'm just going to, and I'm not advocating any of this, right? I don't think violence is the answer, unless of course somebody wants to mess with somebody in your family, and that's a whole different story. Mars and Cancer. But I can just see the energies here, and I've seen 2 events where it's like, wow, something's going on here. There's a bit of a backlash, and I don't remember this being such a big deal, right? This month of this celebration. Did they have it last year? I don't know, but it seems to be ubiquitous this year in a way that I have not experienced it. Like, we were at Fry's on Saturday buying some computers, and all along the line, by the checkout counters, they had this company who makes these lighters, and they were selling lighters, and the lighters were arranged in kind of a rainbow fashion, right? So you could get a lighter that looked purple or blue or green or yellow or red, right? They're all lined up like the colors of the rainbow, and they were at every single checkout at Fry's. And it's like, wow, that's a level of commitment there on something, right? It's like, okay, well, your branding straight up front, badge of honor for Fry's. So I think what we're going to see is a bit of a backlash around this. And it's going to happen this week, and it's right here. It's right there. And especially as Mars gets closer and closer, 16, 17, 18, 19, that Mars-Pluto opposition, that's intense. That's very intense. That's like, more violence intense. When does that happen? Does that happen around Friday? That could be the start of another false flag. We need to see this here. What's going on Friday? We have false flag Fridays. Let's see what we got. By the way, the Virginia thing, boy, didn't that fizzle. There's like no follow-up, nothing there. You know why? It didn't fit the script, that's why. Okay, here we go. Let's see, we got May, June. So we got Mars, where's Friday? Friday the 14th. Not quite opposed. That's going to be here on the 20th. Right there. Right there, 20th. Sun at 28, Gemini. Looks like early in the day we've got, it's going to be Moon in Capricorn and shifting later that night. So these are the days, well, clearly we've got the Friday stuff that goes on all the time. But the 20th, that's a Tuesday, and Friday's the 21st. Here we go, 23, 22, Friday the 21st, 29, Gemini, Moon in Aquarius. Right there. Right there. That's an interesting day from a standpoint of something, again, potentially chaotic and violent taking place. I'd circle that day, 21st of June. Not that we're looking for, but it just seems to happen on Fridays now. And with the Mars-Pluto opposition from an astrological standpoint, that actually makes some sense. All right, let me see what's going on with you guys. Let me check in with you in YouTube, in the chat. Let's see. How do you get a reading? Come to my website, robertphoenix.com. Let's see what kind of, yeah, not what I was expecting. Have Cancer birthday, big parade, kind of weird dynamic. What else we have? LDS Central, so the funniest meme, Pride Listerine. That's funny. I thought it was Men's Month. That ain't happening. What else do we have here? I saw that, Robert. A bunch of teen boys. Teen boys, okay. I know he's on about hard to convey because I sound insane. They called him out on it, gave him extra. He rigged out. Okay, something else going on there. Let's see, what else? Had a brief buffer. Batten down the hatches, no buffering here, okay. I question how much more intensity I can take right now. You can handle it. You're a trooper, Lynette. Come to my website, mindfullove.truth, robertphoenix.com. Heather said this week will be intense. It's going to be very intense, man. Very, very intense. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed. It's going to be very intense. You're on the intense train now. You think it's just going to lighten up at some point, right? You think it's all of a sudden going to go back to like 1987 or something like that? No, those days are done. You know, we're in a different world. We're in a different dimension right now. It's never going to be the way it was ever again. What will come out of this time will be something new. It'll be something different, but it's not going to be the same. It is not going to be the same. One of the things that I think could be very helpful for people is really trying to reconnect with the land and trying to reconnect with nature and try to reconnect with your body in ways that are meaningful. If you can afford a piece of land or work with people to get some land together or rent a house that's kind of out in the country, I think this is really where it's at. I think this is where the new frontier is. And I'm not advocating that people, go back to the Middle Ages, but we can learn a lot from cultures that are more kind of vitally indigenous or connected to the land. Like the Amish, for instance, they've done very, very well for themselves in their own way, and they've kept things really, really simple. And I'm not saying go become Amish. That's not what I'm talking about. But there are ideas there that I think that we can pull from. I think we're going to need it, to be honest with you. We're going to need it. And it's just good. It's just good for your spirit anyway. But we're not going back. That ain't happening. Now that doesn't mean you give up your life. I'm not prepping you for doomsday. You've got to live your life. You've got to do your thing, whatever your thing is, right? And at the same time, you've got to find something that you could kind of, cast your line into the future with. It's really important. If you don't have a future to move towards, whatever that future is, right, then things can get really, really dicey. So look around and figure out where your future is taking you. And astrology can be helpful towards that end, for sure. All right, so we got into the astrology for the week ahead. Let's do some of the astroforensic stuff. Let me go in and see if I can find this. Give me 1 second. Because I pulled a lot of this together last week, and I was ready to go. I just couldn't get into YouTube, man. It was tough. It was really tough. Give me a second. I might do something tonight with you guys. I might throw a chart up and see what you guys have to say about it. All right, what do we got? Let me open this up here. This. Oh, here we go. This should be it. No, nothing in there. All right, hold on. Okay. I got one more. Okay. All right. Let me see if I can. All right. What do we have? What do we have? What do we have? What do we have? All right. I think it's on my desktop. Okay. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to look at a few events from this forensic place, and one of the events I wanted to look at was the death of Diana, Princess Diana. So let me throw this chart up here. So this is somebody wrote to me about Princess Diana, and that there is some kind of new information coming out about people in the Ponte Alma tunnel, and that tunnel is a trip, man. Like the symbolism of that tunnel is loaded. I'll try to get into some of that tonight if I can find my screenshot from that. But this is what was happening, and this was what was going on astrologically at the time of Diana's, well, the accident. She didn't die during the accident, okay? Now, I don't know, some of you, this was what, 1997. So most of you were around then, 1997. But I don't know how attuned you were to what was happening during that time. And, you know, I was pretty awake, and I was trying to understand what was going on, because as soon as I heard she got into an accident, I was highly suspicious, highly. So I was like listening intently to the radio. That's what we had back then. 1997, the internet was really just getting its wings. So what we would do back in the good old days, right, is we'd listen to the radio or TV, and we would try to get details of things. And you used to be able to listen or watch a news event unfold, and those early details were vitally important, because they would quickly, in most cases, get scrubbed and would not become part of the story. So you really had to pay attention, because that's usually when kind of the raw feed would happen. Now everything is so scripted and manicured, and there's the internet, and there's 4 or 5 different versions of something happening, and nobody knows what the fuck is going on. Right? This is kind of the confusion that's out there. But back then, you had limited news channels and outlets, like kind of maximum information at the start. So at the start of what happened with Diana was that it was said that she actually got out of the car. She got out of the car and wound up going and walking into the ambulance. And between when she walked into the ambulance and hospital, theoretically she died. There are some people think she didn't die. There's some people think she got recycled, and I don't know. I think that happens to some people. It doesn't happen to everybody. Okay. So we're going on under the auspices here that she's dead. But when she did leave that vehicle, she walked out of that vehicle. But she didn't walk out of the hospital. So what was happening when that car went into that tunnel? Okay. So here's Diana. She has a really interesting chart to begin with. First of all, we know she's a Cancer, and she has Mercury in Cancer retrograde, and she had Neptune in her 10th house. And that's, the world saw her. This is what Neptune does. Neptune creates pictures and images, and the world saw her in a very generally positive way. I mean, even though she, wound up leaving her husband, how could you not be sympathetic towards her when she was married to that drip? Okay. So the world saw her in a very Neptunian, humanitarian, caring, kind of way, right? She died right around the same time as Mother Teresa, and so she had that kind of vibe, right? She was really into like trying to clean up these places where there were mines left over and kids were stepping on them and getting their limbs blown off. I mean, Diana had street cred. She had street cred at a world level, and it was Neptune in a lot of ways that gave her that kind of credibility. I don't think anybody ever really dumped on her in a Neptunian kind of way. You see that sometimes with people. You know, sometimes they'll play the scapegoat, right? Or sometimes they'll be targeted and they'll have to deal with some kind of dishonor. That never happened to her. It probably didn't happen to her because, well, she left us at a very early age, really early age. So what we have here, we have Neptune in her midheaven, right? A 10th house. And her midheaven was guided by Libra, Venus. Of course, she was beautiful. Diana was beautiful and graceful and gracious, all those kinds of Libran things that we'd associate with Libra. And then we have Neptune and Scorpio over here. And I think the other part with Neptune with her is that I think people felt very sympathetic towards her. I think people understood at an intuitive level that being married to Prince Charles and being part of the royal family was probably not just a real drag, but could be very painful in some ways. And I think we were able to intuit that on some level. And so she had our sympathy. She had our sympathy. She was more real. She was a real person. And the royal family are cutouts. So her sun sign in Cancer had something to do with it. And what do we have here? Well, she's got a nice trine, right? There's a nice trine from Mercury to Neptune. So, and her sun to Neptune. Her Neptune is where at 27. Hold on, Neptune. Let me get back here. Neptune is at 8 Scorpio. Yeah, nice trine. Sun Neptune trine, Mercury Neptune trine. You know, that's just kindness. That's compassion. It's generosity. That's warmth. That's emotion. This woman had emotion. She had emotional content, right? And she had that kind of retiring Cancerian kind of vibe about her. She was a mother, you know, Cancerian mother. So she had this, you know, wonderful trine going right here, right, to Neptune. And her sun, you know, in trine with her midheaven as well. So she impacted people with her energy through the world in the 10th house. You know, she also had some challenges, you know, getting into that Neptune square. She had a Neptune square with Saturn. So she was going to have issues with authority with that Saturn-Neptune square. And what sign is her Saturn in? Capricorn, right? That represents authority. Saturn in Capricorn is authority. Her Jupiter is in Aquarius, and that's rebellious. That is rebellious. She had a bit of a rebellious streak with Jupiter in Aquarius. And Jupiter, and particularly Saturn, right, is square with Neptune. So she was going to have to deal with the Saturnian forces in her life. And this is where the subterfuge is in her chart. It's the Saturn-Neptune square. If you've got a Saturn-Neptune square in your chart, you have your own version of that. You've got your own story that you have to unfold when it comes to authority and fathers and father figures. Prince Charles was older than she was. That's Saturnian, right? And she gets in and all of a sudden she finds out, man, this is not some fairy tale. You know, this I've walked into Ripley's Believe It or Not here. And so she would have, I think, she would have ultimately a reaction towards this because of her Jupiter in Aquarius. Right down here in the 2nd house. It's fundamental, right? She also, look, she has Moon in Aquarius in her chart as well, 25 degrees, conjunct the South Node. So this is like the universal mother with the Moon in Aquarius, especially in the 2nd house, right? The Moon is exalted in Taurus, accidental exaltation in the 2nd house, boom. But affliction, the radical mother who would ultimately wind up leaving her husband. And be clear, she left him. He didn't leave her. He might have been fooling around with Camila and who knows what else. But she left him, and she would pay a price for that with the South Node conjunct her moon. And she would have an issue and a challenge with maternal figures, right? And what sign is Queen Elizabeth? She's a Taurus. Here, her moon is in the second house. That's Taurus's house. Jasper's trying to get my attention. Excuse me. What do you want? I'm doing a show. Doing a show. Hang in there. All right, let's get into what actually happens here. All right, so what you want to look at in a chart like this is, number one, here's her Pluto, right? Right here. It's in the 8th house. Like, she's got a loaded 8th house. Loaded 8th house. If you're an astrologer and looking at this chart, you're going, holy shit. Comes the thunder. Mars, Uranus, Black Moon, Lilith, 8th house. Pluto's over there. True Node is over there. Man. Deep. That's Scorpio's house. That's the underworld. You know, that's death and transformation. Look where the sun is. Sun transiting right there, just a degree or two off Pluto, right? She's got that Mars-Pluto conjunction, and there's the sun kicking in, Mercury. And look where the moon is. Oh, this is really interesting, right? The moon is in the sign of Leo. What do we associate with Leo? Kings and queens. And it's right there on Black Moon Lilith. I look at that and go, interesting. Very interesting. And then the moon at that time was right on the IC. Right on the IC, which is the point of the home. Right, the home. But what's also interesting is the relationship to where she has this crash, which I'll get into. Now, we have the part of fortune. This is interesting because the part of fortune is right on her sun. And I would say that to me would be indicative of her getting out of the car. That the part of fortune would say that she was fortunate because Dodi Fayed did not get out. He did not walk out of that car. And if you've seen the pictures of the car, it's brutal. It almost looks like it was hit head on with either another vehicle or some kind of high velocity weapon. Okay, it's really completely smashed and entangled. He doesn't make it out. She does. Look, part of fortune. To me, I would say she probably got out of the car. That she was fortunate, right? This is an angel right here on her shoulder. But guess what? Here's Pluto right there in the 12th house. What does the 12th house represent? Hospitals. And there's Pluto. Look at that. Bang. Right there. 12th house. Something happened in the hospital. She got in touch with Pluto. Unfortunately. This is what because by the time she got to the hospital, Pluto's going to be deeper into that 12th house because the descendant at the time, which is what was taking place there, based on the ascendant, which is over here in Gemini, which represents more than one story or more than one narrative, right? That's what was taking place. So this all would have shifted, and Pluto would have gone deeper into that 12th house. Okay. Now we've got Mars right on Neptune, and it's in Scorpio. So we're talking violence. We're talking violence, Mars, Scorpio, intensity, death. And when it gets in conjunction with Neptune, we don't know what's going on. There's obfuscation, right? It's not clear. It's clear for a moment, and then it becomes very unclear. And not only that, but we've got Mars squares going on with Jupiter She's going through a Jupiter return, and Uranus was transiting her natal Jupiter. So we've got a Mars square to Uranus as well. Mars is at 10 degrees Scorpio, right? We had Uranus at that time at 5 degrees Aquarius, Mars, Uranus square, Uranus conjuncting her natal Jupiter, very quick, bang, 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 right? Very sudden, extremely sudden. To me, it's the square from Pluto to Mars, and then Chiron to Pluto, and then the Mars square to Uranus, all happening very, very quickly. And I think extreme violence and extreme intensity. But I think she got out of the car. I think she got out. And I think that the fingerprints are right here. That moon right there, that moon in Leo, right there. She's dealing with a moon-moon opposition, lunar opposition as well. Very intense chart. But when I look at her chart, I mean, old school astrology, Pluto, Mars, Uranus, true node, Black Moon, Lilith, 8th house, vertex there. I mean, yeah, that's intense. That's really intense. You know, Mars in the 8th house is generally significant of a violent death, right? You've got Pluto there. I mean, this is really powerful stuff. But I think this is right here. Those are the fingerprints. Moon and Leo. I see right on Black Moon Lilith, the shadowy moon, right? The shadowy maternal figure. And then Pluto in the 12th house, which eventually gets her into the hospital. Let me see, there's some interesting stuff that's connected with the symbolism of that event. Let me see if I can find some. I had it squared away on my computer because of the challenges I had last week. I couldn't, oh man, this is cool. I found it. All right, so let me just throw this in on top of all this. All right, so I'm gonna stop the share here. I'm gonna go back into another share. It's kind of mind-blowing stuff here. Okay, so she was in her car in this limousine that was going through this tunnel called the Pont d'Alma, okay? And the name is really interesting. So I got this from Wikipedia. The exact origin of the name Alma is debated, but it is most likely derived in the female form from the Latin word almus, which means kind, fostering, or nourishing. It has been most familiarized by its use in the term alma mater, which means fostering mother. So when they say, well, you know, what's your alma mater? Oh, I went to University of Texas, which I didn't, but you would say that. Which means the fostering mother fostered your educational needs and development and all that stuff, and then shot you out of the educational womb into the world, right? Or nourishing mother. And in modern times is most associated with the collegiate hymn or song to encompass the years in which the student earned their degree. Also, the Arabic word for water. On the water are al-ma or al-ma. Now, that tunnel was part of a bridge that actually went over a body of water, okay? It may also be a Greek derivation or salt water. Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting. It has been applied repeatedly for the title of goddesses, namely Diana and Ceres. So she was going through the tunnel of Diana when this was happening. As other deities of the light, earth, and day, Alma was used classically in connotation as a way to reflect the traditional female roles in providing nurture. This is exactly what we saw with Diana, right? Following its derivation from its Latin root, it was introduced with minimal usage during the Italian Renaissance as the likely result of a character by Edmund Spenser. Spenser is her maiden name, right? In his poem, The Fairy Queen. Doty's last name was Fayed. That's my editorializing. Doty's last name was Fayed, or the Fayed one. Fay means fairy. Alma, who is the head of the House of Temperance, is considered to parallel the spirit metaphorically. So we have the Fairy Queen, Edmund Spencer, Diana spells her last name different, S-P-E-N-C-E-R, her maiden name. And then he's the author of the Fairy Queen. Dodie is the faded one, or the fairy one. And this is where she winds up dying, or at least this is where it happens. This is where it starts. And it starts in that tunnel, which is a monument to Diana, the goddess. And very interesting stuff. Very, very interesting. David Icke's done a bunch of stuff. He covers some of this as well. But once you find out, like the Ponte Alma, and you just get into it at a surface level, it's like, holy shit, there's something going on here. So I think that what we were dealing with is not only the death of Diana, but it was a ritual event as well. There's ritualism all over this thing with where it all happened. Let me see. I don't know if you guys have seen the car, but let me see if I can find you a picture of the car really fast. Because it's kind of mind-blowing. Let's see this. Let me see if I can find a picture of it. You'll see it almost looks like it was hit with some kind of weapon. Let me just see if I can find it. You got to see this thing. All right, here it is. Like when I looked at it, hold on. All right, here I go. I mean, to me, this thing was just mind-blowing. Hold on. Here we go. Look at this thing. This is the car she was in, Mercedes, right? Look at this thing. Are you kidding me? Mercedes they're not quite in Volvo territory, but man, they are close. They're close. They're incredibly well-made cars. The entire front end is gone. I mean, look at this. To me, this is just mind-blowing. Like what's around him? He's in a tunnel. What is he hitting? Right? Something was coming at him from the other direction. Something happened here that I don't think they can even account for all the buzzing and going back and forth and this guy blacking out and getting confused. Just look at the damage here. To me, that's the Uranian part. And that's Neptune on Mars, right? That's the Mars impact on Neptune. And it almost looks like he's been hit by a freaking missile. Look at this. Man, and she got out of that too. She walked out of that. Part of fortune on the sun. One of the great mysteries, really. And it's not quite up there with 9/11. It's like there's a lot of information here that needs a lot of explaining. And I gave you some of the forensics astrologically. All right, let me check in with you guys, see what's happening, see what your thoughts about this are. Not much damage in the backseat, exactly. Yeah, Diana's kicking the Bahamas. That's what I've heard. I don't know about that. Let's see, Mercedes strong as fuck. Song Dirty, I listen to it with different ears. They tell us all the time and laugh at our ability. So one of the things, 100% ritual, one of the things that Karen Tummel showed up in the movie 2012, Dodie Phillipson's Diana's Mythical Moon Goddess, yes. So Walter Bose's channel is also acting strange. Alma pretty named, what else? I am looping, oh, interesting. Sorry, just trying to do my thing here. What do we have here? They both have, what else do we have? Death All Around, Deep Sea Fears, okay. Yeah, you know, I've heard that Diana, look, I do think there are people who get removed. I do. And they do get relocated and they have different lives. Miles Mathis is really good at that. And then I think there are some people that actually really die. I don't think everybody just takes a pass. But if we're looking at it, if we want to keep that kind of mindset or perspective, we still have to go back to the Mars Neptune conjunction and sort through that and sift through that. But that's Mercedes, man, that's intense, right? That's totally intense. What else? Have you heard about the former Saint? Yes, I did. I saw that. So we have that, posted that on Facebook. And not only that, so we had a former senator from Arkansas. Oh, and by the way, Tony Rodham is dead too. Hillary Clinton's brother died. So we're in a really weird sort of death phase right now. Let me go back to Facebook and I'll tell you guys what the deaths were. So we have, let's see, the woman who is from Arkansas, she was a one-term senator, and it says from CD Media, breaking murdered Arkansas former GOP state senator believed she was closed in on child trafficking ring in Arkansas state government. Linda Collins Smith. Collins, by the way, is a classic Illuminati name. It's one of the, I think, dozen Illuminati names that shows up. I'm not saying she is Illuminati, I'm just telling you that. So she is theoretically out of the picture now. We have another former GOP senator. He was shot. Oklahoma, Jonathan Nichols, 53, found dead inside his house in Norman, Oklahoma, Wednesday night. And the police are trying to determine the exact cause of the death. That was one day after Linda Collins Smith. And then the third really sketchy death was this guy, Silks, who is the NYPD chief. He kills himself a month before he retires. Supposedly, this guy was involved with the laptop of Wiener and everything that was on that, all the horror stories that Wiener and Huma put together, also known as insurance. Deputy Chief Stephen Silks found in an unmarked patrol car wearing civilian clothes Wednesday evening, just 1 month before he turned 63 and faced mandatory retirement. He shot himself in the head with a gun reportedly discovered beside him. Really? Really? So we have 3 very, very suspicious deaths in less than a week. Throw in Tony Podesta, Tony Rodham, Hillary's brother. It's like, wow, things are getting pretty creepy out there. So what does that mean? Does that mean the deep state is firing back? One could make an assumption along those lines. We're playing for keeps now. That's what's going on the planet. If you haven't figured it out, we're playing for keeps. And what's really happening, the awareness of what takes place with children is unparalleled. It's unparalleled. The number of people that understand what happens with children in ways that are beyond description has reached numbers and proportions that have never been reached before. The level of comprehension around this stuff is widespread. And it's really, this is what, Regina and I were talking about, and, God bless her. She's really, switched on about this, that it's really the currency. It's the blood currency of the elites. Children are the blood currency of the elites. That's just the way it is. And, finally people are starting to recognize this. And there's another guy, he was one of these guys, I think he wrote for TechCrunch or something like that. And he's one of these guys that denounced Pizzagate and everything. Well, they just picked him up for denouncing everything that he thought that he said was fake and false and never occurred. So again, we're trying to sort through, kind of this, we're in this end cycle. We are really at this end cycle. And when we get to this end cycle, all this stuff begins to come to the surface. And it's not pretty. It's just not pretty. But in order for us to get through to the other side So theoretically, we can purge this contagion. We're going to have to go through it. It's just the way it is. And, you know, but we're getting stronger spiritually as a result of this. And people's eyes are they're tuned. They're tuned to what's going on. There's no two ways about it. And conversely, what's happening on YouTube? Well, they're shutting channels down. They're shutting channels down because people are getting closer to the truth. People are not crazy. They're not nuts. You know, they're not. You know, people are opening up. People are getting wise. And now what's happening is they want to shut down these portals because that's what's taking place. But it's too late. It's too late now. Too many people have already, you know, got their high beams on, and they can try to shut down YouTube or Facebook or take your pages away. People will always find other places and ways to get information out there. You know, maybe they'll have to lock down the entire internet and do biometric scanning, right? That could happen. It's probably already happening right now. Hello, but you know, people will find a way. And I think there's just too much momentum at this point in time. That's my 2 cents. When we've got this true node in Cancer, I mean, we're getting really into protection. That's what Cancer does. It wants to protect, it wants to mend, it wants to, you know, it wants to nurture and hold and all those Cancerian things. And that is first and foremost right now, because that's where the energy is with the true node. All right, I had this other thing. Should I get into this? Okay, this is the death of Martin Luther King. This is another one that I was checking out. Let me just fire this up there. Okay, so he got shot on April 4th, Aries, 1968. And this was 3 months before RFK would be killed. And that would be on the 5th of June, 1968. So almost 3 months in one day. And this happened in Memphis, very interesting place. And Memphis, Dallas, and Los Angeles, they're all along the 33rd parallel, right? So all these assassinations on the 33rd degree parallel, there were 3 of them. 33, 33, 33, right? 66, and then 33, 99. 6 is inverted. All right, so let's check this out. Let's see what happened. Okay, now he's at this hotel. What's the name of the hotel? Damn it, I just had it. Oh, shit. It's out of my brain now. Okay, he's at this hotel in Memphis. And there are 3 things that the assassination of RFK, JFK, and MLK have in common, besides all of them ending in Ks, is the fact that, besides all of them being on the 33rd parallel, is that every single one of them had either their route or their room changed. Now, MLK's room was supposed to be on the other side of this hotel. He got changed at the last minute so that he could have better access, waving at people, theoretically. The guy who changed that room was Jesse Jackson, by the way. He plays a role in this. Anyway, let's check this out. So we know Martin Luther King is a Capricorn, and, you know, how could a guy with, and look, there's a lot of stuff that's come out about King lately. And stuff that, if you've really been, you know, following these so-called culture heroes for years, they're all flawed, deeply flawed. King was just a rampant womanizer. You know, he was you know, orgiastic. He stole his speeches. He was trained by socialists at the Outlander School in Tennessee. He was primed, right, for everything. And then he basically says, you know, screw this race stuff. I'm going after the Vietnam War. And that's when he started to go off script. And the thing, like, about Kennedy and King and all these people that we venerate, they're all deeply human. None of these characters are perfect, right? They're flawed. They're all flawed. In many cases, it wouldn't be there if they weren't flawed in their positions. Even the founding fathers were flawed. So to find somebody who is morally pure to be in a position of great status and stature and power, well, just keep on searching. Those people just really don't exist. And I'm not giving him a pass. I'm just telling you that this is what we found out about him. And sometimes what happens is we get people who are deeply flawed who somehow manage to either turn corners or decide that they were going to do something maybe beneficial. I mean, look at Anthony Bourdain. Anthony Bourdain had a lot of weird shit around him. Like the deeper he got into being with Asia Argento, the weirder his world got, right? I mean, just look at some of that stuff. It's like, what are you doing, man? You know, he seemed to just get darker and darker and darker and darker. And then he makes these comments about Hillary Clinton and Bill Clinton and how sick they are. And it's like, well, where is this coming from? You know, all of a sudden now he's like taking this stand. And quite frankly, and he says, oh, I met up with their thugs or something along those lines. And they're not pleasant or easy people to deal with or something like that. And then he's gone, right? So even Bourdain, who showed real signs of decadence and being sucked into this really kind of dark, almost death cult-like relationship with Asia Argento, is still taking some kind of a stand towards the end. You see what I'm talking about? You know, for MLK, he's like, well, you know, this race stuff is cool, but I really think that we should stop being in Vietnam. And they're like, well, hold on a second, brother. That's not part of, hold on a second, son. That's not part of your mission. Your mission is this black-white thing. You got to stay out of the war. So he was getting into the war stuff. All right, so let's look at the chart. He's got his sun right here on the midheaven. That's his chart. Great orator. Look at his Mercury. This is really interesting, right? His Mercury is what we would call a singleton. Like he's got Mercury, what, in Aquarius. No, he's got a trine to Mars. It's just not showing up here. Okay. But his Mercury's in the 10th house and a trine to Mars, which makes him a really, really good orator, right? Mercury, 11 degrees Aquarius. He's got a universal message. Sun, midheaven, Mercury in the 10th house. You know why they name streets after the guy. It's right there. Right there. Okay. So we've got that. We got Saturn in the 8th house. To me, this is secrets, family secrets, 8th house, but also these are his handlers, the Saturnian forces in the 8th house. That's my take on this, and him having to deal. This is where he gets his power from. So what do we have here? Well, we have Mars right there in his 12th house, hidden enemies, and it's on his Chiron. Boom. Hidden enemies. Somebody was plotting. There's a plot going on here. Look at this. Sun, Saturn, true node, Mars. This is conspiratorial as hell in the 12th house. And it's conjuncting Chiron. And Chiron is the great wound, right? And, you know, there's the vertex there as well. This is very explosive. Super explosive. Hidden enemies, Mars in the 12th house. Highly conspiratorial here with Saturn, true node, Sun, also in the 12th house. And we're dealing with the descendant at that time of the shooting. So it's somebody that he knew. Somebody that he knew. South node over here in Scorpio. And we have Neptune on his south node. So whoever killed him, he knew them. To me, we got two things going on here. We've got transiting Neptune on his south node. This is relationships now. Scorpio, right? We've got a Neptune square happening. Not, you know, the details are not clear in Mr. King's demise in some ways. They think we think they are, but they really aren't. And then the 6th house is the house of what? Open enemies, right? Excuse me. If Mars in the 12th is hidden, the 6th is open. And what do we have here? Well, we've got the South Node in Libra. And what are we dealing with here? The 7th house. Libra is the rulership of the 7th house. So we have the South Node, the vertex. We have Mars on the vertex, which is also known as the 2nd ascendant, and South Node on the vertex as well. So whoever was involved in the death of Martin Luther King, he knew them. He had a relationship with them. It's not James Earl Ray. You didn't know James Earl Ray. But whoever killed him, he knew them, right? Because it's here. 6th house. Here's the South Node. This is open enemies. This is where it's at. This is the vulnerable part of his chart. So something went down over here on the South Node, right? With the vertex and the obfuscation, Neptune again, South Node in the 7th house. He would ultimately have somebody betray him. Theoretically, South Node over here, Scorpio, right? It wouldn't have to be in death, but it does happen apparently in death. It could have been a lover or a partner, right? Because you're dealing with some very dark material. And so he would have to be, let me just make sure I got that right with that South Node. True Node, let's see, so make sure. Yeah, Scorpio, 28 degrees. So the other side, we've got Taurus, 1st house. So we have to be solid, grounded. You know, with Taurus, you're dealing with kind of an ethical standard in some ways. You know, because you're dealing with, like, I wouldn't say like the true node in Taurus is the word, like you're living by your word, but you're definitely living by something material and tangible and functional. It's like you have to live up to something with Taurus in the 1st house. You have to back things up, like words and deeds. You have to back them up, solid, right? And he's got this Mars and Gemini, and that's just getting whacked out all over the place, right? Square to Pluto, square to Uranus, square to Chiron, square to Mercury, square to Venus. That Mars is getting super stressed out, let me tell you. And then we're dealing with Moon at that time at 2 degrees Cancer. And that's not quite opposing. Where is the Sun at 28? These guys, doesn't really oppose anything, but it does square off against his own Moon. That's right, Pisces. Not really. Where's the squaring off against? Transiting Venus and Mercury. Okay, so I'm looking at this, right? I've got, okay, he's got hidden enemies right there. Mars in the 12th. Somebody's betraying him right here. South Node vertex, Neptune on the South Node, right? In the 7th house. To me, this is where the betrayal is happening. Okay. So, one of the things that I had heard for quite a while, see if I can find this thing. Okay. One of the things that I've heard for quite a while is that somehow the Venerable Reverend might have had something to do with this event, right? So let me see if I can find this here. Let me see. Okay, so, all right. Now, I'm not making any accusations here. I'm just looking at charts. Just looking at charts. I'm doing. And what do we see here now? This is so this is the tragedy and the event, right? And the outer wheel is the Venerable Reverend, who has Mars and Aries right here, 7th house, right? True node or South node in Pisces, 6th house, right? 6th house. Open enemies. And remember now, this descendant or this South node was in MLK's 6th house. And look at the Sun. We have Sun at 15, South node at 18. Pluto, Uranus, 12th house. True node right on Pluto, 12th house. Just a little astrological math. That's all it is. Astrological math. Okay. Let me check in with you guys back in here in Chatlandia. There we go. Let's see, he admitted to having something to do with Malcolm X in the speech. Let's see. Now what else we have here? I'm spelling many words. Mindful in their tagline. Come on, let's try, man. Jesse Jackson shot skyward after this. Dave strives from his smoking. I like Snakeosaurus Bourdain. Jesse Jackson, October 8th. Yeah. Okay, what else we have? 693, all occult numbers. So anyway, there we go. You know, I think the astrology is pretty clear around there. You know, do your own math around it. Some interesting correlations. Just saying. No accusations, just correlations from an astrological perspective. I had one more of these that I wanted to bring up. Let me see if I could find it. I think it's around here somewhere. Where is it? This is one I really didn't pay a lot of attention to. I just threw it together. It was like the other two I spent some time with, especially Diana. But when I started to pop on that MLK stuff, it was like, wow, okay. So I'm not even sure if I should do this now. Let me see if I can figure this out. Okay. Hold on. All right. So what I did is I took Neil Armstrong's chart and I put it up against the moon landing to see if I could get something out of it. And let's play around with it. Let's do this. Okay. So on the inner circle, we have the moon landing. I didn't use the time on the moon for the chart, but I used Houston, mission control. And that's at 2:56 p.m. apparently. And then we have Neil Armstrong on the outside. And he was born August 5th, 1930, so Neil's a Leo. Now here's what's really interesting is that at the time of the moon landing, the ascendant is in Virgo. Of course, we know that the sun is in Cancer, right? And here we have the first house. So we have the South Node, which is a little dubious in some ways, right? A little dubious. Pluto, Uranus, and Jupiter, all in the first house. This is a loaded first house. But the South Node here is like, what's going on, right? What is really going on? And then we have Venus. This is Neil Armstrong's Venus in Virgo. And so he's got this connection to this event. But we know that the South Node in the first house is not really, how do we say this, all that dependable. It's like something that's happened in the past, right? And really it's over here on the other side of the chart is really what's happening in the here and now. And over here we have the true node in Pisces. So one has to ask ourselves, you know, is there being wool pulled over our eyes? Because with the South Node here, right, was this something that they may have already shot beforehand? I'm trying to, just try to break this down into astrological terms, but he's got a relationship with this event. He's got a relationship with this event. And what do we have here? We have this is his moon now, right? His moon, and his moon is in Sagittarius at 25 degrees, conjunct the galactic center, and it's squaring Pluto, right? It's squaring the South Node. So there's some funny business going on with the moon, right? And even here, the moon's behind the scenes pretty much in the 8th house. Then the moon that we know, that supposedly, but where the moon was at that time, it was in Libra at 17 degrees. And it's actually in opposition with Neil Armstrong's Uranus, which is in Aries. And the thing that really grabbed me in some ways about this chart is Neil Armstrong's sun, which is in the 12th house of the moon landing. So there's a lot going on behind the scenes here. And he's playing a character, and his character, even though everybody's seen him, right? I mean, this is like a famous moment in history. Everybody's seen him, and yet he's behind the scenes of the events, which I think is kind of fascinating in some ways. Now, his Mars is up at the top of the chart. You know, that's not a bad place for Mars. You know, Venus, Mars conjunction Gemini. But what is Gemini? Gemini is two things, right? It's two things. But I think what's interesting to me, the most interesting thing about this chart is his sun, which is on the cusp of the 12th, and also Neptune and Mercury also in the 12th house, and then squaring off down here in the 3rd house with Mars and Neptune. And then this relationship with this south node and Pluto over here. It's an interesting chart, and one could theoretically make a case that even though he's supposed to be front and center, he's definitely behind the scenes, and he's got a relationship with something I think that's already happened or taken place. And then over here, we have the true node in Pisces, which theoretically is the present. And what are we dealing with there? We're dealing with hope and dreams and wishes. We have this relationship with the moon, which is this incredible story and making people feel really, really good about everything. His true node is in the 8th house. And that is definitely secrets. Definitely secrets. It's an interesting chart. And I think one that bears kind of more exploring, to be honest with you. It bears a little more exploration. But this part right here is what really grabs my attention. And then the Mercury-Neptune conjunction and the squaring off against Mars and Neptune in the 3rd. Lots hidden in this chart. Yeah, absolutely. I agree. Lots hidden. Totally. Yeah, there's a lot going on with the moon, right? He didn't go. Yeah, I know, right? So I was trying to figure out like what we could determine from, because I don't think, look, I think we've gone to the moon, but I don't think these guys went to the moon. Yeah, I think there's been another way of going to the moon, but I don't think these guys did it. And when you look at the lunar lander, I'm like, my God, you see this thing? It's like put together by Reynolds wrap. It's mind blowing. Anyway, that was just the other chart I was playing with. But the first two charts that we saw tonight, which were Diana and Martin Luther King, are really, really interesting. And, you know, astroforensics is kind of a fascinating study and looking back at what happened. And, you know, we can play around with certain things and other people, other characters, other players, and sometimes we can get some interesting information as a result of that. So that's looking backwards. Astrology is also an art of looking forwards. I think it's getting harder at times on a collective level. On an individual level, I think it's still a pretty accurate exercise. Pretty accurate. You know, I work with people and I do some forecasting with people and still get really good results. On a collective level, I think it's getting a bit more difficult, although it's not impossible. Certain things you can still figure out, but it takes a little bit more work because there are more variables now. And so astrology gives us insight into looking ahead and looking backwards to try to make sense of the reality that we're living in. And it can also be very, very helpful for you on at times a daily basis as well, in terms of looking at your chart and trying to understand where you're going. Leave some space for living. I know a lot of people get super hung up with astrology, and they're so entangled in their transits that they don't have any room for life to come in. And I think that's a really important piece. Like you understanding your transits and understanding what can take place, and both positively and negatively, can be very, very helpful. But when you attach a great deal of meaning and importance to them, then it becomes very difficult for life to kind of work with you and interact with you. And that's the same with any system. Astrology doesn't have a title or a deed on that kind of relationship to our dependence upon systems in order for us to feel safer or more comfortable with the absolute questions of existence that sometimes are unanswerable. That's who we are, what we are, as we move through this story of space and time together. All right, I'm out of here for now. I'll be back tomorrow with 15 minutes of flame. I'm sure I'll find something to talk about between now and the time that I put it all together at 8 o'clock here Central Standard Time in Fredericksburg, Texas. Let me just say good night to everybody and wish you all very well this evening. I'm on fire tonight. Flame on. Thanks, Justice. Do I think the Russians really went? Apparently, the first guys that went to the moon were the Nazis. That's what I've heard. I heard the Nazis went to the moon. The Germans. Let's call them Germans. I don't like that word, not Germans. The Germans went to the moon. That's what I've heard. By the way, have you guys seen the Foo Fighter stuff that Jeff Rentz released? Man, that stuff is crazy. It's like, you know, the bell-shaped kinds of, you know, stuff, Foo Fighters, and they're off the ground and doing things. Like, wow, pretty interesting shit. Anyway, thanks for being a part of tonight's show. Everybody, you make it worthwhile. I really appreciate you hanging out and being a part of this experience with me. It's always fun to break stuff down and share some ideas and some thoughts and knowledge. And, you know, see you around here again next week for the Astro Livestream on Sunday nights. And come visit me over at robertphoenix.com if you want to get a reading. And that's where it's at. I'll be back tomorrow with 15 minutes of flame. Until then, have yourself a very good Sunday evening. And if you're in Texas and the Hill Country, batten down those hatches.